Hello and welcome to another episode of Faith Talk, a podcast where we talk all things theology, religion, and life's tough questions. I'm Oliver, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Payton.
Welcome to February.
Yeah, it's February,
Which
means it's the month of Valentines Day and romance and
and
roses.
commercialization.
And commercialization, yeah. So to talk about relationships, today we're joined by a very lovely couple, Pastors Eddy and Natalie Darisme.
Hello, everybody.
It's a twofer.
Glad to be part of this inauguration.
Yeah,
Inauguration, that's right.
yeah.
So usually we tell the guests, just tell us what topic. But I couldn't help but feel, okay, we got a perfect topic. Just right there. So I let you know, and you put an exclamation mark in the text. So I take it you liked the idea.
I did, yeah. I thought it was really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It fits since we're still in our first year of marriage, so obviously we have all the answers. But oh yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. I think it's so fascinating because you are the chaplain at the high school across the street, and then you are a pastor over here at the church.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen that before. It's really cool, and I knew that was something when I heard about it. I was like, that's going to be such an interesting bridge. I know when I was over at the school, we talked about the bridge, and I feel like this is an example of the bridge. So
Yes.
Could you talk about that a little bit? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for us, honestly, it was a dream. It was something that I don't remember how early on in our relationship, but at some point in our dating relationship, we talked about obviously our goals and our visions for career and life and where we wanted to be. And one of the dreams that we talked about was if we ever got the chance to work together in the same place, that would be so amazing. Especially in ministry, because that's hard to get placed in the same place. First of all,
Yeah.
I feel like is very rare.
Yeah.
But I remember we did this semester. Well, we worked together in undergrad when we were just friends, but then in seminary when we started dating, we did a semester in Berkeley, California, doing some outreach and evangelism stuff. And through that, there was just some different experiences that happened that helped us to realize, hey, we're better together than apart. And doing ministry together, at least for me, I felt like it was even more fulfilling together than just by myself. And it was cool because it's something I'd always prayed about. God, can you bring someone into my life? Can I marry somebody that somehow we can match up in doing ministry together in some form? For us, that worked out. Yeah, kind of nice to work in the same place.
Yeah, she pretty much said it all. The only thing I would add is that it's also nice as a married couple for our relationship not to be in churches or communities that are hours apart, because that just means more evenings apart and whatnot. So it's nice to not have that and to have more time together.
And you did have that a little bit, right? Before you became the pastor of the church, you had that, right?
Yeah, because I was working at a different church that's quite a ways away from where we moved in when we got married, where we live now. And so that was a little bit difficult being that far apart, just relationship-wise. We were this is going to be tough. We're going to have to really work hard because quality time is something that's important to both of us. And so it forced us to be really intentional early on in our marriage, I think, with the way that we spent time together and how we scheduled that and everything. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, a good thing in relationships to be physically in the same place. It's probably a healthier option, and it's especially as people who are in ministry, you don't want to be too split in that. And so it's kind of nice to have our passions kind of focused on the same general location.
Yeah, that's really cool that you guys are able to spend that much time together. But I know, unfortunately, for some couples, it's not like that. They there's such thing as long distance relationships, right? So I guess my question would be, what advice would you give to people who maybe can't spend as much time together?
Are you thinking specifically somebody who is in a long distance relationship?
Something like that, or maybe they're just not able to see each other as often as you guys do.
Yeah. I would say it just takes a lot of intentionality, especially if you're in a long distance relationship. Not being in the same place, living completely separate and different lives. there's really no like two ways around it, but really scheduling in time together. Like, hey, on these nights throughout the week, no matter what, we're going to prioritize FaceTiming or a phone call, or a virtual date. Let's virtually have dinner together. Like it takes a lot of intentionality, and so if you can avoid a long distance relationship, like by all means, like if you can avoid it, don't do it, because it is tough. And if you're not intentional, most long distance relationships do peter out.
Yeah.
But even with like if you're not in a long distance relationship, but just by the nature of your jobs, maybe because of the commute or whatever, you don't see a lot of each other throughout the day. I think also scheduling in date nights throughout the week and blocking out these evenings. This time is for me and my significant other, and I'm going to guard that time, right? Other people don't have access to this time. My work doesn't have access to this time. This is our time, and my time, individual time as well, to like recharge and do things that bring me joy, and take like a mental break from the stress of work or other things that may be stressing you out, to kind of just fill you up.
I'd say also for people who are in long distance relationships, and maybe anyone who's listening that's in college, that can be a pretty common thing for college students or graduate students. And so 2 key things I think for a relationship like that to work are you have to have a really high level of trust. Really high level of trust, because you're not physically in the same space, you're not seeing each other, you're not operating in the same friend groups, there's a lot of separateness in your life, and so you need to build a foundation of trust in your relationship, and make sure that you yourself are that trustworthy person, and examine yourself and like, hey, am I hanging out with someone who's going to make my significant other uncomfortable? I need to be careful and mindful of like what spaces I'm putting myself in, who I'm around. I need to be transparent and honest about everything going on in my life. Talk to them very openly about everything that you're thinking. And also, beyond just like forming that foundation of trust and being a trustworthy person yourself, I think also communication. And this applies to any relationship, obviously, and this has been a huge thing for us in our relationship, is developing healthy communication, but especially for those who are long distance, for sure, is you gotta be a good communicator. So listen to podcasts about it, read books about it, talk to people about it, learn. If you don't feel like you are a good one, learn how to be a good communicator. Because honestly, I mean, this is a statistic that has no backing, but I'm just gonna be like, hey, probably 90% of relationship problems could be solved if we communicated better to each other and in more healthy ways. So I think that those 2 things, for me, are the backing of making a healthy relationship that can last and work when you've got things that are struggles against it, whether that be distance or something else.
Trust is so important. If I just imagine, like, if there is no basis of trust, like you just started dating somebody and then you have to be long distance and you just haven't had the time to build trust, the chances of that relationship actually lasting and going somewhere are very slim.
I find it interesting. You thought the same thing. Trust is the word I thought of when you said that too. And when it comes to faith, the theme of the show, I always have thought of the word faith and the word trust kind of meaning the same thing when it comes to our relationship with God, right? Because some people view faith as this blind allegiance you just put in something without any reasoning. But for me, it's always been faith is more of a trust in God. And I think that our human relationships kind of reflect our relationship with God.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought of when you said trust. And that's, like you said, in all relationships, trust is so important.
Yeah, you can connect that to even more. Because like you said, you need to create intentional time to spend with that person. And it's just like that with our relationship with God. We have to set time apart for Him.
Yeah. Yep. Same principles apply in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's almost like He made us or something.
Yeah.
Almost.
Just maybe.
Just maybe. Yeah.
Well, so that is something we could go into when it comes to relationships, is the idea that, we were designed and made to reflect God. We're made in the image of God, right? And through our relationships, it's like the relationship between God and the church. It's like the relationship between a man and woman. It's like marriage reflects God and relationships reflect God. What, in your experience, how does that correlate?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you want to start? You want me to start?
Go for it.
Oh, there's so many things. Well, I'll start here with the first thing that kind of popped into my brain when you said that. So, I'll just be honest, I've dated a lot of people. If any of y'all are listening, so sorry if I ever hurt you in some way. But yeah, I've been through a few relationships, especially through like college age, and I learned a lot through them, made plenty of mistakes, and learned a lot. And I also went through some that were difficult. One in particular that was abusive. And what I've learned in coming out of like all those different experiences was in my time of singleness before this one and I started dating. God was really putting on my heart that I needed to look for someone, or I needed to let him bring me someone that reflected his character, and that be like the top priority for me, was someone who reflects him and who has an evident relationship with God and lives that out. Doesn't just talk about it, isn't just like upfront sharing stories about it or something, but someone who like lives it out in the way they live and breathe and do everything.
Right.
And so when we first started kind of being interested in each other and figuring out if we like each other and having those first conversations about like, ooh, maybe we like each other, that whole thing, I remember what God was really kind of putting in my mind, I think, was that like, this is a guy, because I'd known him since college, I knew without a doubt in my mind, I was like, I know this guy has a relationship with God. I've seen it. I've watched how he treats people. I see how he treats his family, his friends, the people that are around him. I see how he interacts with people in class or in other situations. And so that was one of the first things that stood out for me, was like, I know this is a guy I can trust and have a good relationship with because I can see his connection to God. And it's not something he's trying to show off. He's got this humble spirit where I can see like the Holy Spirit at work in him. And so that was something that made me even more attracted to him, I guess. As well as like even now, I try to tell you often, so hopefully like it feels like this, but I see God reflected in him so much. And it's why I'm proud to be married to him, why I'm thrilled to have a relationship with you. All of that is like because I genuinely see your relationship with God and you reflecting God's character to the world.
We should have like an awe sound
I
effect or
know.
something. I wish I had a switchboard.
Yeah, I didn't know this was going to be a moment of let me just confess my undying love.
Yes.
But I think your original question was like, how have I seen our, I guess, relationship be a metaphor for how it represents our relationship with God?
Right.
Is that
Yeah.
that kind of it? I think there's a lot of different ways, but I feel like one of the biggest things you discover in marriage is that like marriage like annoyingly makes you a better person.
Yeah. That's such a good way to put it, honestly.
I feel like we could tweet that or something.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
throw that up there.
Like
It's so true.
it really does, and I feel like that's, you know, like God brings a lot of healing and transformation and hope into our lives and makes us more whole human beings. And I feel like in marriage, like that happens at such an intimate level, because like you're doing life with somebody who knows you inside and out.
Right.
You know, all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And yet, you know, they're still here.
Yeah.
They choose to stay. And I feel like that's one of the biggest ways I see like God, I guess, reflected in our relationship. Something a good friend of mine said during our wedding weekend was, and he had been married for a couple of years already at the time, and he said something that has just always stuck with me that I think is so beautiful about marriage, and I think exactly represents like how God relates to us. And the tidbit of advice he said, you know, the most beautiful thing about marriage is to be fully known by someone else and yet fully loved. And like that's so true and so deep, that I'm known by somebody else in the most intimate way and yet still loved. And that's exactly how God relates to us. He knows us so intimately, better than anybody else, and yet still fully loves us.
Yeah. I was hoping you were going to bring that up and say that, because it's so true. And we've often talked about, like, I don't know if trope is the right word to use, of the idea of like, oh, falling in love, la-di-da-da. And we've often said, like, in a healthy relationship, you're choosing to love that person.
Right.
Like, you don't just stumble into this, or like, oh, I start liking you and then we just happen to have a healthy relationship. Like, you make a choice. You make intentional choices every day in a relationship to love that person. And to choose, like, we annoy each other all the time. We know there's going to be things that'll come up in 10 years from now that'll probably be new annoyances, but we choose, like, I love him no matter what. Like, I'm going to love him despite any annoyance, and I'm going to try and learn myself to not be annoyed by those things. And if there's things that I do that are annoying to him, I'm going to try and figure out, like, what are some habits I could switch a little bit so I'm less annoying, whatever. But anyway, but I think, like, just that concept of knowing each other and being fully loved still is really powerful to me, because, like, in a good relationship, you're honest about everything in your life. And you know everything about that person, all their imperfections, all their scars, and all their beautiful things as well, all the hidden pieces of their character that are wonderful that no one else sees. And you choose, like, this is a person I'm going to love. And something for me I think I've discovered in marriage too is delight, I would say, that's given me a new picture of God, is like, I'm delighted in my husband. He's so cool. And I feel like every week there's something that I see that I'm like, you're just so awesome. Like, wow, I get to be married to this. This is so amazing. And I think that must be how God sees us sometimes. And sometimes I think we focus so much on our own imperfections in our relationship with God, or sometimes people will struggle with not feeling good enough in God's eyes, and those can be things that happen in romantic relationships too. And yet, how does God look at us? Like, that's not the stuff that He's focusing on in His relationship with us. He's delighted in us and who we are and our characters and the things that He's bringing up in our characters and the ways He's growing us. And all those concepts can be at play both in our relationships and building healthy relationships, as well as in our relationship with God too, of remembering how God's delighting in us and how much He loves us and chooses to love us no matter what.
You know, you brought up, there's so many things. I love how when we talk about this, if you just substitute God for a romantic relationship, like, you can go back and forth, and it's like we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Because God's love is so reflected through us. And you said something that the apologist brain of mine clicked on, because you said love is a choice. And a lot of the times people have the problem, you know, if God, why evil, right? And the reason that evil exists is because God loved us so much to give us that choice to freely love each other. To me, that's beautiful. That's a great evidence of God, because love has to be freely given.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Like, that we, if love was not a choice on our part, it wouldn't be love because it would just be forced relationship, which is not loving.
No.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Love is a choice in every relationship, not just romantic, but platonical as well. You're gonna have those hard times, right? Because no matter how similar you are still two different people.
Mm-hmm.
But what's cool about that is through those hard times, you stick through it and you grow from that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way with God. Is you're gonna have hard times. You're gonna be times, God, I don't know you got this right now, right? I don't know if I trust you fully.
Yeah.
But through that, you're gonna grow from that. You're gonna grow your relationship through that. So.
That's powerful too, like, even though this is about relationships, like thinking about either those platonic friendships or like if you're not in a relationship, like all these same principles apply in most human relationships,
Right.
regardless. Like any situation that you're in, you know. Yeah. So to all the single folk out there, be encouraged.
I think that's really good to have an encouraging message to the single people in
Yeah.
February.
Yeah.
I think they really need it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're not alone.
Yeah. Single does not mean alone.
Right. I think that's something you and I read through a book about a year ago at this point, The Emotionally Healthy Leadership.
Yeah.
And didn't we have a whole chapter in there about where you're at, whether that's being okay with your singleness or being okay with where you're at in your relationship. We could talk about that, about being okay with being single. I think that's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah. Wow. I love single people. Not in a weird way. Just that single people are awesome. That's what I mean. Yeah. We have this tendency, I guess, this idea that like if I'm not in a relationship, then like my life doesn't matter in the same way as somebody who is in a relationship, or that I haven't arrived yet, I haven't made it, and so like, and that's not the only reason. There could be multiple reasons why somebody might choose to be in a relationship. Maybe they are looking to fulfill a lack they sense within themselves, a lack of love, and wanting to fill that with somebody else.
Like basically, we sometimes seek out relationships or being in a relationship for the wrong reasons. Sometimes.
Yeah. I think this is what I always say whenever somebody who's not in a relationship is talking to me about, oh man, I wish I was in a relationship, and we're having that conversation. I'll always encourage them to just focus on becoming their best friend, like in that singleness. Like, just focus on becoming your best friend, because if you can learn to love yourself and to work on yourself in your singleness, you will be so much better off when the time does come and you do find somebody that you want to be exclusive with. Because what often happens when we rush into a relationship is that relationships are like a pressure cooker for any unresolved trauma in our lives. Like
I've seen that.
anything that you were just completely unaware of before being in a relationship, of like unresolved trauma, when you're in a relationship long enough, it comes to the surface. It boils up.
Volcano.
And it comes out, and it can come out in a lot of different ways. It can come out in becoming completely codependent with another person, to the point where like you lose your own sense of self and identity in fulfilling the other person. It could come out in just starting to adopt patterns that you adopted in your own family, like your own family system. That's a whole other discussion for another time.
Another podcast.
Right, you begin to take those roles. Maybe you were the caretaker in your family. You're always the one that had to be strong and take care of everybody else, and you haven't processed through all that, and so then you try to find somebody that needs to be taken care of, and then you take care of them in a relationship, and then then so on and so forth. So in singleness, it's such a beautiful time to work on becoming your own best friend and growing and processing through those things, going to counseling if you need to see a mental health professional to talk about maybe there are some deep traumatic things that have happened in your life that you've never actually taken the time to process. But doing all of that and learning to love yourself in your singleness creates space to be a whole, more whole stepping into a relationship. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be challenges in a relationship, but coming into a relationship as a healthier version of you sets you up for a better relationship down the road. And just because you don't have a physical person, you're single, doesn't mean you're alone.
That's right.
Right? Alone and being lonely are very different. Right? Alone is, well, I don't have somebody, friends, family, it's just me. Like physical presence versus lonely has more to do with the emotion of feeling like I have no one I can trust. I have no one I can turn to. And just because you can be surrounded by family and friends, even best friends, and yet still feel utterly lonely.
Yeah, that's true. You know, as you were talking about that, it made me think about how sometimes, especially I think for young women, I remember feeling this way a lot as a teenager, and through college, was like, oh, a relationship is going to fulfill me. Kind of this expectation that like, once I get in it, it'll fulfill me. Kind of what like we were talking about. And so I wouldn't want anyone out there to think like, okay, during my singleness, I'm working on myself and becoming my best friend in order to be in a relationship or fulfill someone in a relationship or feel fulfilled once I get in that relationship or something. Like, work on yourself and being your best friend just for you. Because, like you said, the pressure cooker concept, but like when you get in a relationship with someone, especially one that's going to be long term, hopefully, it's not going to solve any of the problems that you are thinking are going to be solved by being in a relationship. Yeah, it's nice to have someone to hang out with all the time. Like, one of the best things about marriage is like, oh, I don't live alone anymore. That's great. I kind of like that, not going home to an empty apartment or something. Like, it's nice to have a spouse in the evening to hang out with, have dinner, watch some TV, go do sports, whatever, have hobbies with. You have a built-in best friend. But I just wouldn't want anyone to think like the reason they're working on themselves is for that relationship, because even in that marriage space, like, you're constantly going to be working on yourself as a healthy person, just thinking about your own habits, your own emotional well-being, your mental health, kind of all those sort of checkups, not just to be a good spouse, but just to have a healthy, wholesome life as an individual person in your own body, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So I have a question for you guys. This is one I've been seeing all over the internet, and I think it's absolutely has to do something with theology, and that's the question: do you guys believe in the concept of soulmates? Someone who perfectly in every way is meant for you through the universe, maybe through God somehow. Your souls are just made for each other. Do you believe in that concept?
That's a great question.
We're gonna get you in trouble now. That's the whole point of this.
You can start.
You want me to start? No.
I'm happy to start too.
I don't think. No, I mean my answer to the question.
Gotcha.
I don't think that God created one special soul to go with yours. I think, like anything else, God gives us choice. And God gives us choice. And it's the same thing with relationship. Like, yeah, there's gonna be personalities of different people in the world that you're more naturally maybe gonna match up with when you meet them. But I don't think God's got one special person out there for you. And oh no, if you don't find them, how sad for you. But I think it's more that concept of, like what we were talking about earlier, choosing to love each other. Is in a healthy relationship, like, you're choosing that other person constantly. And so if you go into it with the idea of this is my one true soulmate, and then things go awry and don't work well, that's going to leave you in a pretty sad place. But I don't know. That's my idea of it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I definitely agree with you. I don't know that I've ever really believed in the idea of like a soulmate. Like there's just one person out there designed specifically for me, because love is so much of a choice. And at the end of the day, like we're all jacked up human beings, and the process of finding somebody to do life with is just finding somebody else that matches your level of jacked upness, so that you can. I mean, I'm being facetious with it and joking around, but yeah, love is so much of a choice that I think God gave us wisdom and discernment to be able to like reason of, okay, like, can I do life with this person? And we also have tools like different personality tests you can take, and doing, relationship counseling together to really kind of process your compatibility. And I think those are the things that are going to set you up for success than believing that I have just this one person, this one soulmate. But we should be an active part in choosing who we want to do life with than just relying on someday I'll find my soulmate,
Yeah, true.
We keep rotating back through similar topics that reflect our relationship with God. I keep going back to the garden even further, just to take it a step further, because that's what God did in the garden. He said, look, I love you. I want you to love me. I created you to love me and to love each other. But at the same time, I'm still going to put that tree there because I love you enough to give you the choice. And then what we have with soulmates, right? You're saying one person out of 8 billion, where are we at? 8 billion now? 8 billion people. You have one shot. If you miss it, you're done.
That'd be rough.
That's a scary thought, isn't it? And that's what the devil does, is he lies to us about things like that. Like when he said in the garden, did God really say? Did God really give you free will? Should you really do that? And yes, I think God directs us, doesn't he? I feel like you guys could probably talk about that too, how God has directed your relationship. But it was also your choice to follow, right?
Yeah, because God always gives you a chance to respond to anything that he's prompting on your heart. And I know, like, we prayed a lot in our relationship. I've prayed a lot about our relationship. Like, there have been a lot of different moments where it's kind of like, all right, is this God? What are we doing? Where are we going? Yeah. Like, maybe early on in the relationship, I was really worried about it because we were in the same friend group. Like, is this going to work? Is this going to work long term? And it did. But I think, like, God gives you those promptings, and God guides, and he provides opportunities, and he maybe pricks your mind with a thought for the direction of your relationship and whatnot. But you always have a choice as to whether you're going to respond and how you're going to choose to act in response to God's calling to you. Something else that was in my brain, this is kind of changing directions a little bit, but something you said earlier reminded me, like, let's normalize counseling in relationships before there's a problem. Something that we did was I'm going to call it pre-engagement counseling. And I suggest this to all couples. Like, if you are starting to think about, do we want to get married to each other someday? Go do some pre-engagement counseling before you even reach that engagement stage. Like, relationship counseling with a professional where you can talk about everything. Talk about your relationships with God and how you see spirituality being at play. Talking about any trauma that you've been through and how that might affect your relationship. Talking about your communication styles, like all the different things. Because premarital counseling is great, but it's focusing on maybe some different things. And I don't know. I just think that, like, starting out as early as you can with good support through counseling or mental health or whatever is a great recipe for success in relationships. Yeah. Sorry, that was like a little tangent, but
that's the whole point of the show. Is the conversation goes where it may.
Yep.
I think that's a good allegory too for God's direction in our lives.
Yeah.
It is since broader than relationships too. I know that there have been so many times when I thought, this is where God wanted me to be. And then it's like, that you seen that meme of the road where it's going straight and then there's the one off to the side and you just skirt off. I feel like that happens in life a lot, where you think you're going one way and then all of a sudden another way. And
Yeah.
what I've experienced, at least, is that once you get to the end of that road you didn't think you were going to go down, you're like, thank God I went down
Yeah.
that road.
Looking back, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God definitely has His plans. This quote we like to bring up: "We make plans and God laughs." Which
So
is-
true.
It's very true.
That's definitely true.
That's interesting too, isn't it? Because we like the idea of plans, because we talk about Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you. I've been reading through the book of Jeremiah. It's very interesting
It
when we
is.
pick out that verse.
Your context.
There's
is
no
quite
verses in the
fascinating.
Bible, yeah, right? I mean, if we're going to pick a verse too, because I read 29, then I read 30 and 31, and I've read through it before, so I've noticed this. But reading through it again, I was like, we pick out 29:11. But if you read a few chapters later, the book gets more and more optimistic as it goes. But we pick that specific verse. Like, that was for Israel. Yes, God has plans for us. I think we can all agree on that. But isn't it more deep than just that one verse to that specific audience at that specific time?
Right. Yeah, definitely so. Yeah. And that's with anything in the Bible. Like,
Yeah.
we can't just pick one thing
Mhm.
out, and that's kind of a different topic again.
Yeah.
Like, read
Right.
the Bible in context, please.
Yeah. I've heard it said, like, you ought to read the verse twice, read the chapter twice, then you read the book twice, then you read the whole Bible twice, and
I
then
like it.
you go back. And
That's
that way
good.
you really get the whole
Yeah.
context of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would go towards relationships too, right? We have to understand the why behind anything. If somebody is exhibiting a behavior, right, that maybe we are bothered by, maybe your significant other's doing something you don't like, what's the why? Don't just bash them over the head, right? Just ask why.
Yeah. Expectations is a huge thing that can maybe cause problems, I think, or cause conflict in relationships. Is like if you have different expectations of each other, or of what the relationship should be like, or how the other person should act, or what roles they should take on in the household when you get married, or those kinds of things. Like when you have all these expectations, you might be setting yourself up for failure, not understanding like why the person does something the way they do is going to be detrimental. Like you said, it's important to hear each other's story, hear each other out, figure out like the behind the scenes of their life that happened before you were in their life, of why they do things or think about things the way they do. And if you take time to communicate through those effectively, hear each other out, it can go a long way. It can help resolve a lot of stuff. Yeah, that's one of the big things they do in like premarital counseling, is just talking about expectations. Like, what did you observe in marriage or family life in your home growing up that's setting up your own expectations for what a marriage should look like or what a relationship should be like? And if you have different expectations, talking about them can help you to avoid some conflicts, so you understand.
Yeah.
You have something to add?
No, just well said. Managing expectations.
You know, there's something interesting about that. I've got a question, because I've heard a lot. Let's do some fact checking on some of the phrases I've heard. How about that?
Oh, yeah.
So I've heard the idea that some people think, I'm going to go into this relationship and I'm going to change things. I'm going to change the person, right? Would you say it's more true that what you see is what you get, and you shouldn't expect things to get better from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can never change somebody else.
Yeah.
That's right.
How would you
I have
feel?
no
if
control.
someone tried to change you?
I have no control over that. You
Yeah.
can manipulate people.
Yeah.
That's not really
necessarily
changing, is
That's
it?
not change. That's just abusive.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah. It's a good thing to assess in yourself going into a relationship, or maybe in the early phases. Well, really at any point in the relationship, looking at like, am I trying to change this person? Like, okay, there's this thing that I'm annoyed about, or like, oh man, they keep doing this and I'm frustrated, or like, oh, we keep arguing about the same thing, and oh, I wish they would just XYZ, whatever it is. I wish they would change in this way. And if you're looking at it that way, I think your focus is in the wrong place. And this is something I think God's put in my mind many different times of, all right, Natalie, like, stop focusing on like, oh, Eddie, I wish you would just do this differently. Rather look at Natalie. Natalie, look at Natalie. Like, what is it that I need to maybe shift in my own behavior, or what is a way I'm looking at this that's problematic in my own thinking? Like, how is God trying to change my thoughts in this? And I think if you're wanting to change anything in a relationship, like, ask God to change your heart, not the other person. Like,
Right.
yeah, you can ask for God to make a difference in their heart, of course, but I think you got to start with yourself, and asking God to address your own issues, basically, and work on those things with you first, rather than focusing on, like, oh, I want to change this in them or something like that. At the same time, like, if there is a significant problem happening in a relationship on a recurring basis, like, it is important to talk about it with each other in a healthy manner, not where you're blaming or attacking the other person. Like, don't just brush over those things, obviously. Like, don't expect to change them, but also, like, do bring up if there's a problem that's going on. Find a healthy way to communicate about it with each other so you can work through it.
Yeah, sometimes people fall in love with a future version of someone else that they've created in their mind, or the idea, or we fall in love with the potential of who someone could be, and we're like, if I can just get them to be this way, then this could really work. I would just encourage you to, whatever it is that you're trying to get them to look for somebody that already possesses that characteristic, instead of trying to force somebody to become that.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you're trying to change somebody, do you really love them, or you just love the potential version of them, right? Because from what I've heard from this conversation is that love is falling in love with the person for who they are, and not who they're about to be or who they could be, but who they are in their entirety, with their flaws and imperfections.
Yeah. And I'd say the outgrowth of choosing that is, like, a beautiful thing that happens in marriage is you get to see who they become. Because we all do change and shift and grow throughout our lifetime. And so even since the beginning of the time we've been dating to where we are now, like, we can see ways we've changed in the past years that we've been together. And I know 10 years down the road, like, there's going to be things about us that are different than now, hopefully in positive ways because we've grown and learned. But honestly, like, that's one of the most beautiful things for me about being married is we get to experience those things together and get to, again, I'm bringing it back to the word delight, like, get to delight in, like, the ways that God is growing and changing and moving our characters forward. And when we come at it from that perspective of, like, not us trying to change each other, but what is God just going to do in our lives as we grow together, it's an exciting and positive thing, because you are going to change. God is going to influence you to make changes in your life. But when it's coming from Him, it's going to be a lot better than us trying to do it to each other.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because it was interesting the way we talk about, change and how you love someone where they're at and everything. Somebody asked me the other day, we were having a kind of interesting conversation about similar topics such as these, and he said, Payton, do you think that God loves people where they're at? I was like, well, yes, absolutely. But He also loves us too much to leave us where we're at. Yeah. And that's where God comes in, right? Because I can't change anybody.
Right.
I can't make you do something. That's all up to you. God has a transformative power. That's why we see people praying, like, give that person a new heart. Because I can't give that person a new heart, but He can. But we shouldn't go into a relationship expecting that. Yeah. Because that's not what it's about, right? That's not what a relationship's about.
No.
Yeah, I was thinking about, what you said about God loving us too much to leave us where we're at. I feel like the whole process of, like, transformation, or as we like to call it, in the Adventist church, sanctification, which is a big theological term that we throw around.
Yeah.
I feel really, if we boil it down, it's just the process of acclimation God takes humans through to help them better receive and experience His love. Because we would not be able to, like, even fully understand or comprehend or grasp or experience that love if it was just, like, boom in your face.
Right. Oh yeah. Like Moses couldn't look at God's face.
Yeah. I love this analogy. I read it in a book somewhere a while back. I can't remember. But if all of us, the four of us here, were stuck in a cave for even a month, and there's no light that could reach the cave, if all of a sudden after a month somebody opens, the door, rolls away the stone or whatever, lets you out, and it's in middle of the day, clear day. Like, I think we probably would all crawl back in the cave because the light would be too
Shock to the
intense,
system.
right?
Yeah, like I do in the morning when I turn the light on.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if instead you walk out of that one cave and you go into another one that has just a little bit more light, right? There's just like a couple of cracks and there's a few rays coming through. We can adjust, right? That's bearable. And then you go into the next one that has a little bit more light than the last one, and so on and so forth. And I feel like that's what God does with us. He acclimates us to experience His love.
I like that word you use, acclimate. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon.
Exactly.
It's our whole life. That's the thing people will do. They'll put up. They do this for relationships a lot too. I've seen this. Is the goalposts. We gotta push them. Like the way I see it, there should only be one goalpost. Our end game is just getting closer to Jesus, and everything else flows through that, including our human relationships. But if we set up all of these little goals, we talked about New Year's resolution in our Word Wednesday. It's all coming full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to sort of end off on. So thanks so much, Pastor Eddy and Natalie, for being on here. We
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
us.
Of course.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for listening or watching if you're watching this. Hopefully we will catch you on the next episode.
Yeah, make sure to check us out on our social medias. We're on most platforms.
Of course.
And we'll see you in March.
Yep.
God bless.
Peace.